Amnesty International has said the world is seeing a near breakdown of international law. It cites multiple conflicts and the rise of artificial intelligence as the main threats. The annual report on human rights singles out Israel and its allies for, quote, multiple violations committed in Gaza. It also says China and Russia are demonstrating a willingness to destroy the rules-based order. The organization said there has been a betrayal of human rights principles by today's leaders and institutions. Amnesty International Secretary General condemned what she called the collective punishment of Palestinians in Gaza.
The level of violation that we have monitored is unprecedented. We have certainly seen that in Gaza over the last 6 months, with an extraordinary number of victims within the civilian population, with the use of famine as a weapon of war, with a collective punishment imposed on Palestinians, the largest number of journalists killed, the largest number of humanitarian actors killed, a very unprecedented harm to civilians ever recorded. So these violations are not only extremely serious, they are also justified. So Israel is justifying all of those violations, and the United States, until very recently, has done the same.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by our special correspondent, Aya Ibrahim. Aya, Amnesty's report puts a spotlight on Israel's war in Gaza. It also draws attention to the October 7th terrorist attacks by Hamas on Israel that triggered the war. Amnesty is again urging the International Criminal Court to take on and investigate alleged human rights violations. Is all this likely to have any impact? Are there likely to be consequences of this?
Well, that's exactly the point of this report, right, is that in the face of all of these violations or alleged violations, there haven't really been consequences. And certainly the report highlights the situation in Gaza, Israel's war in Gaza, but also talks about Ukraine and China and other world powers. And what the report says is that because there have not been consequences, we're risking the collapse of the post-1948 world order, the values that had been declared universal back then, and the belief that they work for everybody and that they work for everybody equally, that's what's at stake, in addition, of course, to the lives and livelihoods of the thousands, if not millions, of innocents whose rights are being violated every day without consequences, according to the report.
I looked at the report, just the top of it, and it suggests that the world is indeed regressing in terms of human rights in the world. Just want a quick question about Germany. It's also singled out in this report. Why is it criticized?
Well, Germany is one of the most, is the staunchest, if not the strongest, ally and supporter of Israel in this war. And what the German government, we should specify that this is the German government's position historically has been, is that Germany has a special responsibility towards the Jewish people because of the crimes of the Holocaust, and that translates into support for the state of Israel. And Germany, which had forged an image of itself post-Second World War as a country that upholds human rights, is now being accused of double standards, of not being harsh enough and critical enough towards its ally Israel as it commits human rights violations in Gaza. And we've seen German leaders visit Israel. The United States, American leaders have done the same, declare time and time again their support for Israel and the war, despite there being some very serious allegations of war crimes and an alleged genocide being accused. Israel is now being accused of an alleged genocide as well. And German support has been pretty strong throughout.
This is a big report. It covers 155 countries. What are your main takeaways?
So, of course, there's there's that overarching theme that powers, not just the United States, but also Russia because of the war in Ukraine, and China because of the violations against Uyghurs in Xinjiang, that these three powers, because of their veto power in the UN Security Council, they're the ones that are sort of accelerating this descent towards a world where universal human rights seem to be meaningless. And it's really, it almost invites a rethinking of that world order and whether or not these three superpowers should have as much power as they do to really dictate, accountability, questions of accountability.
So the report looks at major powers, it looks at individual conflicts, but it also looks at developments in terms of technology. It talks a lot about artificial intelligence. What does it say about that?
Well, the report definitely points the finger to big tech, the lack of regulation for artificial intelligence, and the way that technology could be abused to accelerate violations of human rights. On one hand, it says we are regressing. We're going back to a pre-1948 world. At the same time, we're sort of also racing towards this future with AI and with the rise of this new technology, but so far that has not been regulated. So it's a weird time warp we seem to be finding ourselves in.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was our special correspondent, Ibrahim.
Now, in the weeks following the Hamas terror attack on October the 7th last year, Israeli authorities cracked down on protests that criticised Israel's military response. Well, over 100 Palestinian citizens of Israel were arrested for participating in protests or posting on social media. DW special correspondent Arman ISF met up with the human rights lawyer Ahmed Khalifa, a Palestinian citizen of Israel, who was himself arrested at a protest and charged with incitement to terrorism.
In a small apartment in Haifa, lawyer and activist Ahmed Khalifa is under house arrest. After spending 114 days in prison, it's an improvement. But Khalifa says he's still essentially a prisoner.
That's the ankle bracelet, you can see it exactly.
If he steps outside the apartment with this electronic tag, the police will be alerted. They'll call him on this communication device, and if he doesn't answer, he could be held in violation and sent back to prison. The worst part for Khalifa is that the court ordered him to rent an apartment outside of his hometown where his children live and go to school. They can only come to visit on school holidays like today.
The only thing that we did is going in a demonstration, trying to support the people of Gaza that were under 12 days of heavy bombing.
On October 19th last year, Khalifa helped lead a protest in the Israeli town of Al-Fam, where he's from. They chanted slogans in support of Gaza, he says, not Hamas. A video from that day shows him urging the crowd to remain civil. Soon after it began, heavily armed police intervened and started arresting people. Khalifa was one of those arrested.
They wanted to teach the other people a lesson by us. That's why our arrest was so cruel.
Khalifa was charged with incitement to terrorism and spent 3.5 months in Megiddo and Gilboa prisons, where he alleges he was deprived of sleep and food and was beaten by guards. As a lawyer who has defended Palestinian prisoners, the experience was eye-opening.
I used to think that when they say physical torture, the people exaggerate because they want to get out from jail, you know. But the stuff that we saw there is amazing, like it's real horrors.
Khalifa claims that in the weeks after the October 7th Hamas terror attacks, Israel's justice system abandoned the rule of law.
It's like, if you're not with us, you're against us. That's the thing, and they said it to me clearly in my investigations. And it's things that make you think again about everything that you learn, about the whole law system, you know. In one night, there was no law, no police, no authorities, and everything changed.
I put Khalifa's claims to Israeli authorities. The Israel Prison Service sent me this response. We are not aware of the claims you described. Nonetheless, prisoners and detainees have the right to file a complaint that will be fully examined and addressed by official authorities. The Israel police wrote, the individual in question participated in an unauthorized march characterized by incitement where he assumed a leadership role. The Israel police will continue working diligently to protect our citizens and will not tolerate individuals endangering public safety through incitement to violence or support of terror. Khalifa is hopeful that the Israeli courts will acquit him once legal proceedings wrap up. His life will eventually return to normal, he says, but his faith in the justice system has been shaken to the core.
And our special correspondent, Arman ISF, who filed that report, joins me now in the studio. Hi, Arman. Tell us, what is the state's case against Khalifa?
Well, he's been charged with incitement to terrorism and identification with a terrorist group. This goes back to the chants that were chanted at the protests that he helped organize. One of them that he mentioned was Gaza will be, it translates roughly to Gaza will not be conquered. From video, we were able to hear another chant, which was there's only one thing to do, push out the occupiers. Now, both of these are being interpreted by the state as being pro-Hamas, Gaza will not be conquered, and being basically calling for the expulsion of Jews from Israel, so push out the occupiers. But of course, he himself is a lawyer. He's been to protests before. He said that he and the other organizers sat down and came up with chants that they believed would not get them in trouble because everybody was afraid that they would get in trouble. And he assured the protesters that they would be safe if they chanted these chants. And in the end, he was arrested and sent to prison.
So Amnesty International alleges that there has been a crackdown on any criticism of the Israeli state. With all of the research you've done, the people you've spoken to, does your research back this up?
There seems to have been a period in October and November when there was a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of anti-Israel protests. Now, don't forget that the anti-government protests have been tolerated. That's against Netanyahu and his government. But anything that's perceived as being anti-state or anti-military, anti-operation in Gaza, there was a major crackdown on this in October and November. The state itself said the official figures that 140 indictments were put out against people for protests or social media posts. Adala, which is a human rights group, said that they counted 270 indictments, arrests, or warning talks. 95% of these were Palestinian citizens of Israel. So not Jewish Israelis, but Palestinian citizens of Israel. I met with one Jewish Israeli, Mayor Baruchin, who was arrested, and he was spent 4 days in prison. But he himself said that the Palestinian citizens have it worse. Most were for social media posts. And in every case I've seen, it was for instances of speech or protests that could be interpreted as being against the state or against the military, but something that in Germany or the US would not have been punished with prison time anyway.
Okay, and what is the legal basis for this crackdown?
The legal basis is a 2016 counterterrorism law, but of course the enforcement of that law, a lot of human rights groups say has been political. In Ahmad's case, and also Mayor Baruchin, the Jewish Israeli, they said that it was because there was local authorities far right or who had a grievance against them and were using this time in October to settle a score. Ahmed Khalifa is an activist, and he did a lot of work about police violence. So the police didn't really like him, and he thought they were settling a score with him. We couldn't verify that. But another thing that human rights groups are saying is that this goes back to the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is one of the most far-right members of the government in Israel. And he is in charge of law enforcement. He's in charge of the Israel prisons and in charge of the police. And they say that his influence has had a chilling effect on free speech because of the way that the police and the prisons are able to enforce these things. Now, don't forget that the Supreme Court has thrown out a lot of these cases, but the chilling effect is still there when you get thrown in prison, even if you're not convicted of anything.
Arman, thank you so much. That's DW's special correspondent, Arman ISF.